Hi, I'm Chris Hughes, CEO and co-founder at Acquia, and thanks for joining us today's session. We'll be diving into a topic titled From Months to Weeks, How Continuous ATO Drives Federal Compliance Modernization. Today, I'm joined by AJ Yon and Lloyd Evans. Before we dive in, gentlemen, can you guys give a brief introduction, maybe starting with you, AJ?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. I'm AJ Yan. I'm the director of GRC engineering here at Acquia with Lloyd and Chris. I work on helping federal agencies automate their compliance initiatives and find better ways to provide evidence for these things, but also get back to real security and allow us to really find out what's going on from a security perspective. So super excited about this conversation today. Lloyd?
Thank you, AJ. Yep, I'm Lloyd Evans, VP of Governance, Risk, and Compliance here at Acquia. Very similar to AJ, focusing on introducing automation in a compliance frame to basically smuggle in strong security engineering practices into programs and agencies and businesses as well, through kind of the lens of compliance, especially as we talk about federal agencies and all of the requirements therein. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm excited to have both of you here. And as you know, everyone's talking about this in the federal and the public sector. How can we cut ATO timelines from months to weeks? What does that look like while driving security improvements? And it's tied to our overarching efforts, whether it's internal FISMA systems at agencies, getting ATOs through risk management framework, or external efforts like FedRAMP 20X, for example, around cloud and SaaS and so on. But before we dive into kind of what's broken and how we can fix it, what exactly is an ATO or continuous ATO, Lloyd? Like for folks that are coming from, maybe not the public sector, what do those terms mean?
So forgive the oversimplification here. There's a lot to it, but basically every system or kind of application within a federal government context needs to achieve an authority to operate, which is really like an authorization for use of that system to deploying capabilities to end users, whether that's across DoD contexts, or over at the VA or some of the many other agencies. Really, every system needs to have an authority to operate to effectively run. And through that, there's a long laundry list of requirements to be able to achieve that. That we'll start to get to are mostly the process through achieving these requirements are very historically, manual point in time kind of processes. AJ, anything you want to add before we hop over to continuous authority to operate?
Yeah, I think for folks, kind of just thinking on the commercial side, right? Like it's another requirement on the federal side to say like, hey, they're allowed to operate here. They're allowed to do these things, and it's a big deal. I want everybody listening here to understand that this is a really big deal, and it's super important. So there's a ton of motivation both from leadership and then also the product teams because they want their product to have this ATO. So it's a huge activity that causes a little bit of stress and chaos, which we'll talk about how we help reduce that.
Yeah, say a little bit of stress is putting it lightly. Anyone who's been through the ATO process knows it's, the system owners are stressed out, the developers are stressed out, the security team is stressed out, and it could be a stressful experience for sure. And we've seen the federal space and the public sector, and of course, industry at large go through various, evolutions. We've seen cloud and SaaS and APIs, microservices, Kubernetes, containers, you name it. But the ATO process really hasn't kept pace with some of that. When we look at the traditional ATO process, Lloyd, what are some of the pain points or things that, cause that stress or cause these problems?
Yep, I would really focus in on cost, time, and then the cost of time of the way that we fulfill these requirements within agencies. So depending on the agency, the context, ATOs can take anywhere from 4 to even like as long as 18 months to be able to achieve. And even when you have a really like strong security and compliance team in alignment with your development teams, oftentimes some of the constraints that inherently exist within the process in terms of getting this paper signed by this particular person or getting this particular thing in the exact format or like letterhead that in order to be accepted by a given kind of a assessor body. All of these things really add up, and especially once you get into the time value of money and from a cost perspective, we could be looking at $30,000 plus per assessment, with a lot of activity involved in these exercises, but oftentimes when we think putting our security hat hats on, there's sometimes very little signal to noise that's included as a part of that. So there's a lot of work that's been done, but then you'll talk to any actual security engineer or kind of technical lead that's a part of the actual development activities, and they'll often say the security aspect is really detached from some of these compliance activities, which leads to a lot of that friction. Especially when we're moving to production, we need to get out. We need to start actually leveraging the value from our applications, and the ATO is kind of a barrier, or maintaining the ATO is kind of a barrier to those things.
Yeah, I think in this environment that we're in now, we're seeing a big emphasis around deregulation, faster time to value, getting new software and capabilities into the hands of system owners, agencies, DoD mission owners, et cetera. And you talked about some of the policy and process and cultural kind of friction that we run into around the ATO process historically, and even now as we move to continuous ATO. But AJ, like on the technical side, what does that look like in the cloud environment? How's it, how's that different, or what's the pain point there?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's happened over the years in the cloud environments are that resources are no longer long living. Things are being spun up so fast and then torn down, and things are moving so fast. And then in this ATO world, or this continuous ATO world, you still have to maintain documentation. You still have to maintain your control statements. You still have to build SSPs. You still have to collect assessment artifacts. And all of that, it's kind of funny because, like, if you talk to the GRC people, they're saying continuous ATO, and then you go to Lloyd's point, and the security folks are like, "Where's the continuous part?" like what is? I don't feel it. I don't feel that continuous. So a lot of it is that they're living in that DevSecOps world. They're living in their pipelines. They're living in the cloud. They're spinning up resources. They're living in infrastructure as code. But then here comes the ATO process that kind of takes them back 10 years before. And there's hundreds of hours of repetitive, low value work. And a lot of time, frankly, spent on paperwork instead of engineering tasks. And that's really what Lloyd was talking about as well, where that signal to noise for the security teams, it's very difficult for them to kind of see, the benefit or the why and actually get excited about it. Because despite the name cATO, you hear continuous, you're like, hell yeah, automated, and it probably, you think that, but then you get into it, you're like, this doesn't really feel as continuous as I thought. So I think it's the nature of how fast technology has grown and innovated over time. And then, with the ATO process and assessors and that whole ecosystem, it's been tough to get that part to catch up, to get to true continuous authority to operate.
Yeah. So Lloyd, that phrase of continuous ATO is not new by any stretch. Folks at environments like Kessel Run and of course the DoD software factory ecosystem have kind of championed it and pioneered it, and now it's grown into broader, federal agencies and the public sector and so on. You guys have been using this phrase recently, and again, it's kind of a name. It doesn't necessarily. It's not a formal name captured by NIST. Same with continuous ATO, to be honest with you, it's ongoing authorization. But you've been using this term, cATO plus. What exactly is the plus, and kind of what are you guys emphasizing there that maybe you think has historically lagged, even in the context of cATO in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think kind of pulling on the thread that we positioned early on, right? The requirements haven't really changed. How we fulfill those requirements leveraging automation has changed. And I think from a historical context, a lot of the early successful programs, leaned very hard towards the, rely on the pipeline, rely on the actual infrastructure as code, really kind of focus on the development activities, and almost completely ignore the documentation piece. And I think that was the right approach at that time. But just from one of my perspectives, it enabled or it kind of led to a lot of challenges with the communication, with the buy-in. We talk about things like reciprocity, extending a process to other people who might not have the correct context, or even, in some cases, like the education level to really understand kind of what is going on at the technical level. Really, the plus, all that is a reflection of, us leveraging automation and all the tools available to us to be able to build that kind of communication layer, through the compliance requirements that are already existing in the first place. So in the context of cATO, it's tying the development activities and the findings from your pipeline and all the actual kind of scanners that you have within your pipeline, also the checks that you have within your infrastructure, whether we're talking about runtime, and then tying those to the appropriate NIST, AC2, for example, for access control, or for your audit and logging, AU2. And that way you are able to speak very seamlessly to both worlds. When you're talking to a product team, agency, and you can lean in and be able to talk to them at their level of like, hey, here's the risks associated with this particular finding. It's not just throwing things over the wall to them, but then you can also immediately turn around and be able to talk to, very traditional federal stakeholders and say, here's exactly how we're, fulfilling, AC21 or something like that. And so it makes things really easy. It makes communications a lot easier. It really helps with that, streamlining and speeding up of the process, that we're all aiming for.
Yeah, diving a little bit deeper on the technical side, AJ, you talked about this, like, developers, engineering teams, they're living in infrastructure as code. They're living in cloud native services, APIs, devs, CI/CD pipelines, and so on. Like, how do we bring GRC into that world? I feel like it's, it got left behind. We're still living in Excel, Word, PDF, these manual, cumbersome processes, not using technology to our own benefit when we think about governance, risk, and compliance. Like, how do we bring GRC along on that process? And what does it look like from a technical perspective to do some of these things, kind of assess the controls or meet the controls with the technology?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And I think it comes back to a lot of what Lloyd was just talking about with the translation aspect of being able to translate the GRC work to everyone else. And what that means is you kind of got to go live off the land. You got to use and speak in the language that the other folks are using. So when we think about SSPs, right, these long documents that somebody's sitting there typing, this in this cATO Plus world moves to OSCAL-based automation, where SSPs are generated programmatically, which means your SSPs are based on reality, which is what we really want. And again, if you think about the translation that Lloyd's talking about, instead of thinking about, oh, I have to go talk to the engineers about the policy that says we have to do X, Y, and Z in our CI/CD pipeline, the policy is generated because we have this OSCAL-based automation that says this is what's going on in the pipeline. Here's what we validated. Here's how it's tied to those controls. And ultimately, here's our SSVs. We think about control statements as a service, reusable, validated, centrally managed. Think about a lot of aspects in the DevSecOps world. They're going to have some templates, some artifacts that are centrally managed for people to go out and grab. A product team can say, hey, I need to do authentication. I need to do this. And they're able to go grab that. So we're kind of doing the same thing with control statements. When you think about your documents as code in the pipelines, this to me is the most exciting part of what we're talking about with cATO Plus, because historically, if you think about an assessment, a lot of the pain that happens in that SDLC conversations, a lot of the pain, especially in the modern world, right, where we're having engineers that are shipping hundreds, if not thousands of changes a day. And we're living in this world where I as a junior engineer, I'm deploying and I'm coding on my machine, and then I'm able to push it up to production. It's obviously going to go through some checks, but I'm going directly there. So asking for a list of changes doesn't generally make sense. Now with cATO Plus, what we're saying are like, all right, we know that there's some great activities happening in the pipeline. We know that you're doing SAS scans, DAS scans, container scans, whatever it may be. And, us here at Acquia, we're like, hey, we understand how that relates to NIST 853. We understand that goes to SI4 or SE2, whatever it may be. And we're able to take that data directly out of the pipeline and document it, generate the artifacts, and validate those automatically. So now those engineers, and going back to the whole DevSecOps thing, right? DevSecOps was designed to help people go faster. cATO can become a bottleneck. It can slow people down. So when we talk about this example here, which I think is the easiest one for people to visualize, instead of an engineer having to be pulled out of developing and pulled out of working on their application, they can just keep going because we know the pipeline. We're going to go grab the data from the pipeline, and we're going to make sure it's available from the cATO perspective. And then another aspect, especially in the federal space, is the automated inheritance. You need to be able to eliminate that duplicity across systems. If there's some central CISO controls or some central controls that everyone can use, we shouldn't be having individual conversations with those product teams about those controls, because one, it's out of their control, and two, that's wasting everybody's time because we should be able to inherit this. So a lot of the technical aspect of this, I think, again, comes back to let's automatically generate artifacts, let's validate those artifacts, and then let's reuse those. Let's not have this all handwritten where I have to worry about version control in the Google Doc over here and all of this. Like, no, we're gonna live and document this stuff as code. We're gonna live in the pipeline where the security activities are going. And then, like Lloyd was saying, and I think this is the key aspect of all of this, it's the translation. It's how do we translate that to the actual ATO work and making it matter for the assessors, making it matter for those product teams.
AJ, I had a follow-up question. There was a comment that came in here from the audience. They said that I think the technology advancement has been amazing, but unfortunately it's created a knowledge gap for a lot of the assessors. I think that's why GRC engineering, the GRC engineering movement is gaining so much momentum right now. Taking off your Acquia hat a little bit here. I know you have a book on GRC engineering. You have a LinkedIn course, if I'm not mistaken, on GRC engineering. Like, what does the workforce, training, development, education piece of this look like for the assessor community? The typical community who's lived in Excel and Word and so on, hasn't had much time around cloud native services, APIs, CI/CD pipelines. Like, how do we bring that part of the workforce along on this journey?
Yeah, I think one, we have to have empathy for the assessors. We have to have empathy for the folks in the industry. And I know people that probably are listening to this and follow me are like, well, AJ has empathy for assessors. Yeah, I do. I know I talk a lot about them, but I do. And I think it's because, like, if you and we've run into this, Lloyd and I have run into this, where we'll do a ton of automation, but it's not necessarily usable immediately for the assessor. Because they might not have those technical skills, right? They might not have that ability to dive deep into the JSON and figure out what's going on. So how do we meet them where they are? How do we take the automation that we built and maybe go build an Excel sheet for them out of the JSON that makes it all pretty and right? But that's not to get rid of the automation. It's to help educate them and bring them along the journey. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a partnership here. Like, I really hope assessors and folks on the GRC side really embrace this GRC engineering movement, and they invest in their technical skills. They learn some Python, they learn some infrastructure as code, they really learn cloud. Like, if you're going to start anywhere, learn the cloud, understand all the services that are in place. But at the same time, I think folks like on our side, right, on the Acquia side, they're helping, we have a responsibility to bring them along and to help kind of meet them where they are while still at the same time trying to get the results. So I do agree with that comment there from Nate that it's created this huge knowledge gap. And I think that's why GRC engineering has become such a thing, because companies are realizing it. I think assessors are realizing it with the market. And then if we look at just across the board in commercial and the federal side, almost every organization, whether through job descriptions or RFPs, are asking for some flavor of GRC engineering. They're asking for someone to come in and help me do these things. So there's a lot of momentum. And I think for the assessors, just jump in. Don't think that it's too hard to learn. You may have studied programming years ago or whatever, but just jump back in because there's a true ability now to bridge this gap between GRC and the technical side.
Yeah, I like how you framed that. I think it is, someone put this in the comments too. It is a bit of a middle ground. On one hand, it's having empathy for that community of folks, showing them, empowering them through resources in learning and development, training, education. Like, here's some resources you can use. Here's what you should be doing. But it's on them to take some ownership of, hey, here's a direction where the career field is going. I got to do what I got to do so I can remain relevant and employable and useful and, be effective in my role. That way people don't dread engaging with me or dread, oh, here comes the assessor. It's like, we don't want that kind of culture or relationship either. And I was
just one thing
Lloyd,
to
go ahead, AJ, go ahead.
I just want to double click on that because Lloyd said something earlier that I thought was really cool about using this to kind of I forgot the term you used, Lloyd, but I liked it a lot. It was something about like to smuggle security through, right? Like, and I think if you're an assessor, you should be thinking about that, right? Like most assessors, like, we care about our jobs. We want to do a good job. We want to improve the security of the people we're working with. This is the way to do it. This is the way to get to more valuable conversations, is by increasing your technical skills, learning the details, so that when you go talk to that engineer, I tell people this all the time, like, and we're seeing it here at Acquia, the relationships we're having with the security folks are so great because they're like, finally, people are listening to us. Finally, they're taking all the stuff that we've been saying seriously, because the product teams care about ATO. But now the security teams, because we're doing GRC engineering work, we're speaking their language and we're implementing things that they've been trying to implement for years that nobody. So I think if you're an assessor or you're in this space, to your point, Chris, like, take that leap, because it's only going to help you in your career, but ultimately help us all get to better outcomes from a security perspective, because we're going to move closer to where the real security is happening. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, it's a great point.
And that's on that too.
Go ahead.
So from an individual standpoint, I have almost nothing to add to AJ. Like, I think it's empathy. Everything you said is completely spot on. I would say, for maybe some of the folks who are a little bit more resistant. I would just kind of paint like a broader brush too of how things are changing over time with the GRC engineering movement. So we're seeing this right now with kind of rollout of like cATO, cATO plus, but like there does come a time where the incentive structure that is currently keeping the behaviors of a traditional ATO program kind of intact. Like once those incentive structures change and you start to look at contracts being shaped around technical assessors, working with product teams to revolve findings, there's not really going to be a place for screenshotting the AWS terminal, or doing kind of like manual review of like a GitLab repo. Like those activities that are currently done aren't going to have a place once the incentives change. It's still early enough where you can lean into that, and as an individual, to AJ's point, really find massive amounts of success. But for the folks that are kind of lagging behind, it's just this is kind of the way things, at least the way that we see things moving. And it's really just you kind of lean in now. It's really just how it goes. So thank you.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that one important thing here is like we've always historically, both in the public sector, DoD, federal agencies, and the commercial space, like, and you still hear this now, is like, compliance doesn't equal security. And it's like, I don't think they're necessarily wrong, because the way we do compliance doesn't equal security. If we bring it closer to the real system state, the real, DevSecOps pipeline, the findings from the source code repositories, et cetera, cloud native services, automated assessments. Now you're talking like this is a real reflection of what the environment is, the configurations, the vulnerabilities, those kind of things. So it can be a reflection of what real security is when it's done correctly. I think this is why this paradigm shift is so important. And we've talked a lot, about cloud native services, APIs, automation, DevSecOps pipelines, you name it. But at the highest level of leadership within these agencies, they care about outcomes, right? Like they're focused on outcomes. So Lloyd, like what are some of the actual, kind of agency mission business outcomes that leadership, can get from this movement of moving towards continuous ATO or cATO plus, for example?
Yeah, I'd say so. Both AJ and I have called out, very specific controls, right? Whether it's like AC2, SI2, any of the like really like S, families. In the moderate baseline, there's like 350 odd controls depending on the agency that you're working with. The agencies that we've seen that have really leveraged or leaned into this, such as like DoD, USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS. By going individually line by line through, let's say like a moderate, that 350, moderate baseline controls, we've been able to tie some sort of automation to up to 75% of those controls, and be able to, in totality, then shorten onboarding for an ATO or the initial authorization period by 50%, reduce ATO timelines from 18 months to, kind of our target, which is 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes we've achieved this with 0 findings. That target is more of like a baseline of like, based on what we've, experienced with previous success, here's what, agencies should be targeting. And I want to call that out too, because, there's a lot of going back to the history, right? Like people talking about, like a day one ATO in a day type thing. And I think a lot of those efforts, especially around platforms are really solid. But at the same time, for an agency that may not have a centralized platform that needs a process that can kind of apply to a wide variety of systems, there's going to be, onboarding time for rolling out assessments. There's going to be training involved to, people who are familiar with the traditional process that need to adapt to the new process. There's always going to be kind of bringing in, humans in the ecosystem along for the ride. And so, that 6 to 8 weeks, it really is incredible, and also within the reduction in timeline comes a total change in the activities that are a part of that timeline. So it's not like, hey, here's the same process just done really, in a shortened time frame. It's, here's a, wide variety of different things you may be unfamiliar with, but are really in alignment with how DevSecOps is intended to work. These things are shorter than the traditional process, which is, primarily manual.
Yeah, I wanted to add on that. Like when I look at these organizations, and I've been around the public sector a long time, like we spend an inordinate amount of money on security control assessors and ATO processes. And all of that leads to delayed timeline of getting new capabilities, new systems into production environments that can be used by the agencies directly or the constituents downstream of them, whether it's CMS, HHS, the VA, DoD, you name it. People are relying on these systems and they're delayed due to these legacy, cumbersome manual processes that we use. So it really is driving towards better better outcomes of folks that rely on these agencies and civic services and so on. And so diving down a little bit more, AJ, on the mechanics of automated assessments. I know you're really passionate about this and been doing some cool stuff there at USPTO, for example. Like, what does that really look like? And what does the streamlining of the assessment process look like? And why is it better than traditional snapshot in time, paper-based, screen share, screenshot type stuff?
Yeah, it's to me it's really cool. Just at its core, I think it's a pretty cool stuff from a GRC perspective to have SSPs generated in seconds, 70% of control statements being pre-built and automated, and assessments running continuously, not once a year, but continuously. And a lot of what we're doing, and I'll give an example of on AWS with native AWS services, going out and collecting things from Security Hub, CloudTrail, Config. And like we talked about from the pipeline, pulling those into Security Hub as well. And then every day we're collecting evidence. We're putting it into a folder. We're laying it out. We say we have time and date stamps of where a check is. So instead of 1 to 3 month review cycles that, like you said, Chris, spending a ton of money on assessors, a ton of money on activities, think about all those Zoom meetings, Microsoft Teams meetings, and all the people involved. Those are pretty expensive calls. If you kind of add up the cost. Now we've replaced that with real-time evidence feeds. We replaced it with assessor can say, hey, on September 9th, September 8th, yesterday, like show me how AU2 was operating. Okay, you can go do that. You can go click in there and get all of the details associated with AU2 across the infrastructure. And I think that's really cool. And those are the real results, because now we're not talking about, hey, I got to go spend a whole cycle of collecting evidence for a control. No, the evidence is already being collected, and it's being collected on a regular basis. And then if things happen, people are being informed, so we can make really good decisions. We can make better risk decisions. And the assessors are able, I think one of the real benefits that is kind of an unintended benefit, assessors get to go deeper. They get to go deeper into the technical weeds. They get to see more details than what they would see if they were just asking for a screenshot, or if they were just asking for kind of manual evidence. Now they're getting real details that potentially can highlight maybe not a control failure, but potentially a risk, right? And say, hey, like, I think if you guys keep going down this path, something bad might happen. So I think that the most important piece there is one, kind of going back to my initial point, is like living off the land, like focusing on what's already in place. What is the agency, what does the organization already have in place from a cloud perspective that we can leverage? What are they doing from a DevSecOps perspective? And then how do we bring that all together to get to that real-time evidence feed so that assessors can get that information on demand, product teams, ISSOs can all get that information on demand, and no one's waiting to find out, are we good? No, you're going to know on a regular basis whether or not you're good.
Yeah, and I think knowing that is so critical. Like even now, like not to turn this to the AI piece, but I've been following vulnerability management research. Like I'm always doing that, of course. And like we're talking, they're developing exploits in minutes now. And like if you think about how we do quote unquote security, which is really compliance in the public sector, it's like, well, 8 months ago the SSP said this, and it's like that has no reflection of what the system really is at this time, or what it may be vulnerable to, or how it's configured, or anything like that. Like we need this real-time telemetry and insight into the system, to be better positioned to defend these agencies and organizations from cyber threats. So I think this is a critical movement that we need to see spread. And speaking of that, like whether we use cATO plus, GRC engineering, like all these terms are really reflections of a change of how we do this work in cybersecurity and compliance, a change in our methodology. And there's other industry efforts like DoD SWIFT, for example, Software Fast Track, I think it stands for, or FedRAMP 20X, those kind of things. How does adopting this new methodology or paradigm shift of how we do compliance, like how does this better position agencies, to achieve the kind of outcomes they're after, Lloyd?
Yeah, I think one of the core economic benefits of software, really in any ecosystem, is just a one-to-many like leverage approach, right? Really, for a SaaS tool, you build one tool, you can deploy it to X many customers, and it just is an immense like economic benefit. And from the standpoint of compliance, where we have these like very traditional manual processes, we're really just applying that kind of leverage for agencies to benefit from in the compliance space here. And so introducing, like whether we label it like cATO plus in terms of just the underlying automations, your pipeline, tying all of the automations to tie all of that to your compliance requirements, rolling that out and then training users in kind of that new dynamic or paradigm really enables the agency then, and especially the agency stakeholders, to leverage that one-to-many approach where now, Chris, to the points that you're bringing where, software is just dynamically changing so quick nowadays, you have a much, much more accurate near real-time feed of where your compliance, and we're starting to get, it's kind of like bringing compliance more in line with security is I think a beat that all three of us that we've been talking about. Instead of kind of the prior way of doing things, which is you'd be a security or a compliance stakeholder within an agency, that your manual processes are producing some highly variable data. You're not really sure, where things are from a risk reduction perspective. Replacing those activities with automated activities that are pulling data directly from the system really enables a level of visibility, I think, that hasn't quite existed in the ATO space. And it's something that, I'm personally really excited to be a part of.
Yeah, I'm with you there, but of course, it requires a mindset shift. Whether it's the engineering teams, the compliance and security teams. Like, what does that mindset shift look like for the workforce, AJ, as we look at these agencies and the people supporting them?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to embracing this GRC engineering mindset. Lloyd and I were talking probably a few weeks ago. We were talking about, like, is there a world where you have GRC without GRC engineering in the future? And I don't think so. I don't think there is a world. I think you have to say GRC requires engineering, not paperwork. Documentation should really be a byproduct of DevSecOps, a byproduct of all these activities, not its own initiative. It should reflect reality. We should know that, hey, security has shifted left. Despite the noise around the shift security left movement, it's happened. Security has shifted left. Now, can we do better? Absolutely. But that means compliance needs to shift left as well. And we need to decide, all right, we're going to go closer to where the actual security activity is happening and not wait and try to ask for the result. We're going to go get the information there. And really, if you kind of think about that mindset shift, it's say compliance and delivery should operate at the same speed. We should be going at the same speed. We should be working together hand in hand. It shouldn't be this afterthought that comes out and now we have to rush to get an ATO. No, this is all about engineering the activity throughout the life cycle of the product or whatever it is that you're building.
Yeah, it almost makes you, we love our phrases and catchphrases in cybersecurity. It makes me think of another one where security and or compliance should be built in, not bolted on. Like, it should be part of the process. You should have that real-time visibility and telemetry into the system, the environment, working hand in hand with the engineering team, and so on, leveraging technology to have better compliance outcomes. So we've kind of run the gamut of talking about continuous ATO plus, and emphasizing how it's not just about speed, it's relying on the frameworks, automation, empowering engineers and security control assessors, helping agencies move at the speed of the mission. Lloyd, AJ, any kind of closing thoughts or commentary or recommendations you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I can start. I think we really should think about cross-functional teams on our compliance teams. So today it's going to be very difficult for you to go and find, unless you're at Acquia, where we have all these great resources and great talent, a bunch of cool GRC engineers. But unless you're Acquia, you're not going to find a bunch of these folks, right? But maybe you can get one that you can embed a GRC engineer within your assessor team that can be working closely with your assessors, and invest in that engineering fluency. I think that's so important right now. Whether that's assigning someone on your team to say, hey, go all in on this GRC engineering thing, or bringing someone in, I think we have to make that investment. I think we should start thinking about how do we treat compliance artifacts as code, not documents. We need to operate in code. We need to operate in a more dynamic world. We need to operate in the pipeline. And I think ultimately, like, what we do is really important in GRC. I want people to remember that this is really important work. And I know GRC kind of gets treated like a little brother sometimes in security, but this is really important work. And if we can get and invest in this GRC engineering, if we can do all this stuff we're talking about with cATO Plus, and we're seeing it, you heard some of the stats from Lloyd, the impacts are huge. And to me, it really helps us become even more valuable as GRC professionals, more value in the work we're doing. And if we can deliver more securely in a more faster manner, the faster we can deliver on the mission. And that's super important for all the agencies that we're serving. So yeah, just invest in that engineering fluency, man. We gotta embrace it.
Yeah, I wanted to just co-sign something real quick, and then over to you, Lloyd, for any final comments and thoughts too. Is I like the idea of embedding engineering expertise within the team. Whether again you kind of invest in some existing resources and let them upskill and develop those engineering skill sets, or you take someone who's a little bit more technical and you embed them with the security control assessors and the ISSMs, ISSOs, et cetera, because they're going to start to teach them, hey, we actually can do this way, and there's a faster way, an easier way to do this. Oh, what's this service? Oh, that does X, Y, and Z. Here's how it works. Like that helps spread that education, through working together instead of just saying, hey, go learn this course. It's like, hey, let's work hand in hand. You'll pick up this institutional knowledge, this knowledge about engineering and automation from me as we work on this together. And I've seen a lot of success with that kind of hybrid blended team type model that you talked about. And just to your point about compliance being important, I don't like the phrase that security doesn't equal compliance, or compliance doesn't equal security, because anywhere I've ever worked in my 20 plus year career around security, what is the number one thing that people care about when it comes to getting them to take security seriously? Compliance, right? Do we have our SOC 2? Do we have our FedRAMP? That's going to enable revenue, for example, in the commercial sector. In the public sector, can we go to production? I don't know. Do you have an ATO? Like compliance is always that fundamental linchpin that we need to be focused on. So it really is so critical to security. We just need to modernize how we do it to have it be more effective, in my opinion. Lloyd, over to you for any kind of final thoughts as well.
Absolutely. I would just pull on the revenue thread. For businesses, companies, compliance absolutely should be focused in terms of growing the business and enabling the business. From an agency perspective, I think something that's top of mind for every agency right now is budget. There's a lot of conversations. I think we're all well familiar by this point, of kind of what the budgetary landscape is looking like. And I would just say, the nice thing about automation, right, is it's, if you're looking for areas to save money, reallocate money, looking at your ATO process from an automation standpoint, is a great way to kind of, find budgetary savings from there. And then it's almost odd that, kind of like almost as an afterthought, you've also increased your agency's security posture and compliance standing, through something that is, kind of cheaper than the legacy way of doing things.
Yeah, well said. And, I got to make a little bit of a plug here for my team or they'll get mad at me, but we do have a white paper we just released called Continuous ATO Plus and Federal Modernization, Accelerating cATO Through Compliance Documentation Automation. Check that out. And then also we'll have another webinar coming up in this series with a GRC platform partner that we've been working with coming up on September 23rd, because something we haven't really touched on throughout the conversation is getting all this information into a central GRC platform, right? Where whether it's the CISO, security leaders, executives across the organization, security control assessors, you name it, can go and see, okay, like what's our posture across these systems using all the telemetry and insights from the cloud, from the pipeline, things like that. So September 23rd, keep an eye out for that. So AJ, Lloyd, thanks so much for jumping on with me. And thanks for everyone who tuned in as well. Take care.
Thank you.